In the 80s and 90s, one of the big draws of video games at home was to bring the arcade experience into people's living rooms. With that being said, arcade hardware was almost always more powerful than home hardware. Thus, many arcade ports came out far less than ideal. Maybe the most infamous example of this is Pac-Man from the Atari 2600. Pac-Man was an absolute smash hit in the arcade in the early 80s, so the obvious logic to corporations like Atari was to try and bring it home. They tried to bring Pac-Man home to the Atari 2600 in 1982, but the results were disastrous. I mean, just look at this. Does this look anything like the Pac-Man in the arcades? Of course not, because the Atari 2600 hardware can't handle it. Well, fast forward to 1989, Atari released the hardware-pushing arcade game Hard Drivin. It claimed to have realistic physics and was one of the first examples of a true racing sim. It was a solid arcade game for the time. Atari decided to bring the game to the Sega Genesis in 1991, and it was developed by Tengen. Well, how did it turn out? Well, you're looking at the same gameplay footage that I am here. This is Hard Drivin' on the Sega Genesis. To put it politely, home hardware at the time could not handle polygon racers very well. Sometimes it's better to just leave the arcade experience in the arcade. Hard Drivin' is a perfect example of that. I mean, just look at the frame rate here. I'm pretty sure this is maxed out at about 8 frames per second. Maybe. It looks like a slideshow. Well, now let's talk about the actual game here. There's only one course and it's split into 2 sections. You go straight for the speed section or you turn right for the stunt section. Once you finish a lap in a certain amount of time, you can qualify for the championship lap, which means a one-on-one race against a really tough CPU opponent. But good luck getting to that point, especially on the stunt track. Now the speed section is pretty straightforward. It's more like a standard racetrack, and I did manage to reach the championship lap for this one, but I lost very quickly to the CPU opponent. The stunt section though is outright horrific. There's a bridge you have to jump over, and you can't go faster than 60 miles an hour, otherwise your new car will be totaled and explode into a ball of fire. But if you do manage to conquer the bridge, then you have a Hot Wheels style loop-de-loop, which is even more tedious and difficult. The controls have a solid quarter to half second of delay. I can't even really explain how delayed the controls are. It's one of those things you'll have to try out for yourself. It's like steering a giant dump truck through a narrow alleyway while simultaneously being expected to not hit anything. It is blatantly obvious that the Sega Genesis hardware is chugging to be able to run Hard Drivin'. The visuals look fine while your car is still, but as soon as the game starts moving, you can hardly make out what's in front of you. There's traffic on the road for some reason, even on the stunt track. So for instance, while driving through that dreaded loop-de-loop, I got run into by traffic from the other side. What is traffic doing in a loop-de-loop? You won't even be able to see the incoming traffic until you run into them, and it'll be too late by the time you notice them. And even if you do notice them, the game runs at such a slideshow-like frame rate and the controls are so delayed that there's probably about a 95% chance that you won't even be able to get out of the way. You're going to crash over and over and over again. Most great racers all have a great sense of speed. That's what keeps the excitement up in a racing game. But you'll never get that in Hard Drivin', not only because of the frame rate, but because you'll never be able to drive more than 15 to 20 seconds without your car bursting into flames. There's only one song that plays at the menu, and then there's this kind of hilariously depressing jingle that plays when you crash your car. You'll hear the hum of your motor, and you'll hear yourself crash a lot, and that's it from the sound department. There's really basically nothing. I have to commend this game for trying to push the Genesis hardware, but clearly the Genesis is not even close to capable of running this game properly. It's the unfortunate nature of a lot of arcade ports in the 80s and 90s. The home consoles just weren't up to snuff, and they weren't capable of taking on games of more powerful arcade hardware. And Hard Drivin' is a perfect example of that. I think anyone would agree that we'd rather play a game with lesser visuals that plays well compared to a game that's pushing hardware that plays poorly. Hard Drivin' is interesting as a tech demo for the time, but otherwise, unless you just want a few laughs with friends, I'd stay away, or just play the arcade version. It's much better. So there you have it. That's my review of Hard Drivin' on the Sega Genesis. Now I want to hear from you all in the comments. Have you played Hard Drivin' before? What do you think of it? I appreciate you watching all the way through, and if you're not subscribed, feel free to hit the subscribe button, as I will be uploading more retro gaming videos every week. My social media links are in the description below, and thank you for watching Grand Retro Station, and enjoy the rest of your day. Happy retro gaming, everyone!